Greetings and welcome to Maisha Kazini. We are honored today to have with us Professor Sanyu Mojola, who is a professor of sociology and public affairs and the Maurice P. During Professor of Demographic Studies at Princeton University. She has written a number of books, the first of which is Love, Money, and HIV, Becoming a Modern African Woman in the Age of AIDS, which was published in 2014, and that is the book that we have met today to discuss. So her research is generally about how societies produce health and illness, with a particular focus on the HIV/AIDS pandemic as it unfolds in various settings such as Kenya, South Africa, and the US. So karibu.
Asante.
Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, you had mentioned to me the research, but somebody pointed out the HIV statistics in the university. And then I said, let me go back to that book and see what she has to say. So we are going to get to the education system in a while. But I wanted to start, as I always do, with a kind of biographical note on how you came to this research.
Yeah. So thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to talk with you and to talk about this work. In my second year of university, I was taking a class on sociology of health. And the professor in one class made the claim that people don't get sick by accident. And I was so shocked because I thought that it's just bad luck, Pole, I'm so sorry you got sick. But this claim was very interesting to me, and he was saying how it's very predictable, how especially for people who do, say, survey research, where if you have people's age, you have people's gender, you have people's neighborhood, you can calculate how long they're going to live on average. And it's not like even in Kenya provinces, you can tell which provinces people will live longer than which provinces. Like it's all highly predictable. So even though at an individual level, it's random.
Yeah.
You don't know why this person, why that person, but when you look at a population level, it's actually highly predictable. And so I was really struck by this idea. And at the time, the HIV/AIDS pandemic was really ravaging the continent, African continent. And so after I graduated, I did an internship at the Anglican Church of Tanzania with a lady who was a counselor for people living with HIV. And so her job was to test, counsel people before they did the test and after they did the test. And at the time, medication was not available for free or a price people could afford. It was about like $1,000 per person, per month. So out of reach, it was, so getting an HIV positive diagnosis was like a life sentence, right? And so, or death sentence, I should say. And so, I remember a couple of clients of hers coming, and I would observe. I was her sort of like assistant, or I was doing an internship. And I remember one lady had come in and they were talking, and so it was like, okay, so what will you do if you're positive? What will you do if you're negative? And if you're positive, who will take care of your children? So it was like death planning.
Wow.
And I was just so struck by these conversations. And then after the test, they then process, okay, now what are you going to do? And if you're negative, how are you going to make sure you're not infected again? And I realized, at the time there were millions of people living with HIV across the continent. They still are.
Yeah.
And I was struck by, gosh, there are millions of conversations like this happening. And I want to be able to help at the level of millions, not just at the level of one by one, even though the one by one was crucial work, crucial.
Yeah.
Like her work was really amazing. But I felt somewhat frustrated after a long sort of, not even long, like weeks, just contemplating all these conversations that had to happen and how can we stop this. And so I remembered my undergrad class, and I thought that, well, if it's predictable and if it's actually social, not just biological, then we can fix it. So there was a certain amount of hope that suggested that it's within our grasp to stop this epidemic. And so when I looked around, I saw that the people who were working at the level of policy, they had PhDs, and many of them were in the West. They were either in US or Europe. So I needed to get a PhD. So that's what led me to graduate school. And this book was my dissertation, came from my dissertation project, to try and understand, why HIV was so high across the continent more broadly, but among young women in particular. So I read an article that found that young women had much higher rates than young men in 4 cities in Africa. That this study was focused on 4 cities, one of which was Kisumu. And in Kisumu, they found that almost about 29%, or something like that, about a third of girls 15 to 19 were living with HIV, and almost 40% of 20 to 24-year-old girls were living with HIV. This was in the late 90s. So when the epidemic was really at its height. And I was so shocked. How is this possible? How almost, a third to a half, almost a third to a half of girls in Kisumu live, having a fatal disease, because at the time there was no medication that was available. And so that's what led me to begin this study, because I started looking around and realized, and the rates in Kisumu were like 5 to 6 times higher than young men. So I started looking in survey data and saw that actually in many African countries, young women had much higher rates than young men, but that it varied. So in some countries, it was twice as high, like Zimbabwe. And in Malawi, girls had 9 times the rates of young men. In South Africa, 5 times the rates. And so I realized the fact that it's variable also confirmed it's not biological. Some of it is biological, but a lot of it was not. There was something social going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was counterintuitive for me, because I thought men have more sexual partners. So what explains before we go into the details?
Yeah.
Is it that the girls have more partners, or they are exposed to more risk?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, let me explain the biological part, right? So, or even I'll start with geography, then biology. So, in the US and Europe, men have much higher rates than women. And part of that is because the epidemic is primarily among men who have sex with men. At least if I were to generalize, or certainly over the history. And part of it is if you don't mind, I like being frank.
Yes,
So
yes, please.
so there are different modes of transmission, and some modes of transmission are higher than others. The highest is through blood to blood contact. Say if you, for example, have a blood transfusion. This is why people who are hemophiliacs and needed to go to blood banks were very vulnerable. So it's like almost like a 90% chance if it's blood to blood. Then the other is mother to child transmission. And so that could happen through breast milk, in the womb, and during delivery. That's, so that's another sort of high. And then you have sexual transmission. So with sexual transmission, there are different kinds of sex, right? So oral sex is almost very low risk. There isn't even a probability that people have come up with. But then you have penis-vaginal sex. And that's about maybe a 3 in 1,000 chance per coital act. That's the fancy word. So for every time people have sex, it's about 3 per 1,000. But anal sex is much higher. And so that's the highest risk sex that people can have. And so that's why men who have sex with men are at highest risk, because they're the ones who are much more likely to have anal sex. And so if you sort of take away the people and just think about the modes of transmission, it's more about the mode of transmission. So if a woman has anal sex, then she's also going to be at very high risk. And so now the complication is, the risks are very low, like 3 in 1,000 is very low. It's a very low probability. So it's actually very hard to get HIV. But the issue then becomes, as you mentioned, either people having a lot of partners, or if they have another sexually transmitted infection. So if someone has herpes, or if someone has chlamydia or gonorrhea, then now you can throw those probabilities out of the window. The risk becomes now very high. And so and there's some debate in the literature about the role of other STI, sexually transmitted infection epidemics, and their role in amplifying HIV. But there's enough, I think, to my mind anyway, I'm convinced that there's enough evidence that having a sexually transmitted infection epidemic, such as chlamydia or herpes, will make it much more likely that you get HIV, because it creates like additional openings in the body for the HIV virus to enter. So there's now, when you come to now specifically why girls have more at risk than boys in sex, there's more HIV in semen than there is in vaginal fluid. And so that means that when if there's no condom use, then a woman is much more likely to be exposed to the HIV virus in semen during sex than a man is through vaginal fluid. So that's why that's the biological part.
Yes.
But now layered onto that, and this is now what I started to try to understand in the book, is now what are the social mechanisms above and beyond the biological, right? So that's why I said in Zimbabwe, girls are twice as likely to have twice the rates of young men. But then in Malawi, they had 9 times the rates, right? So that means that, okay, biology is the same everywhere. And so why is it 2 times here and 9 times here? So that's now the part that the social can help us understand, right? And so I think it's important to understand there is a biological piece, that even if you only have one partner and you're monogamous to that partner, if one of you has HIV and one is a man, one is a woman, the woman is much more likely to get it from the man than the man is to get it from the woman. But now it's the other social dynamics that we have to explain. And so part of what I was trying to understand was, one, is it about just multiple partners? But what I realized was it's not so much multiple partners. Men have more partners than women, but it's about the kind of partner you have. And so when I looked at the survey data, I saw that the HIV rates for young women and the HIV rates for men started to match when you staggered them by like 5 to 10 years. So the pattern seemed to be that 15 to 19-year-old girls' HIV rates matched those of men, like say 25 to 29 or something like that, right? So you saw that actually what seems to be happening is they're ignoring same age men and going for slightly older or much older partners. And so then the interviews were to try and understand why. Why are girls ignoring same age partners and going for older partners? So then it's not even about you have lots of partners. It's that the one partner you have is older and much more likely to have HIV. And so even if you're monogamous to that partner, you're much more likely, right? And so I think we often think, oh, it's because girls are having a lot of partners. Sometimes that's the story, but often the story is, no, it's the partner you're picking is more likely to have HIV, and you don't have leverage to demand safe sex. Because they're older.
They're older and they have money.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, before we get to that, could you just explain this idea of transition to adulthood framework? Because that's what you use. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about young people in particular, because this was something else that was striking in the statistics. is when girls are much more vulnerable between the ages of 15 to 24. This is what I noticed when you like lay out like when are the rates highest, or what's the pattern of the rates, and you notice that for young women, risk starts, even age 15 to age 24, you have a very rapid climb in HIV rates. Then it sort of seems to plateau, and then it starts to go down. But for men, the peak starts much later and carries on much longer before it then starts to go down. And so that then sort of suggests that the age group we need to be concerned about is young women, because if young women get it, and then pass it on to, or the pattern could be older men pass it on to young women, then young women
when
marry,
they're older,
and then pass it on to men. So you sort of see how it cycles off. And so if you stop HIV among young women, then you can age the whole disease out. See what I mean? If you wait long enough, like, right? And so I realized, okay, I really have to think about this age group 15 to 24. And so this is the age when people are moving from childhood into teenagehood into adulthood, right? And so there's a lot of research looking at this period of time, 15 to 24, this transition from childhood to adulthood. And so that's basically transition to adulthood. And so people tend to focus on particular markers. What are the things that mark people as an adult? And what are the processes that people take to reach those milestones? And then is there risk that's associated with those transitions? And that then becomes a place to focus. So for example, in many societies, you become an adult when you have a child, when you get married, when you move out from your parents' home and establish your own home, when you finish school. So those are 4 examples, right? And so you can then start seeing, okay, so if I want to study where the risk might lie, right? Not just for HIV, but also for things like pregnancy, for things like juvenile delinquency, right? When people tend to crime, right? All of these things happen in this period when people tend to drugs, right? And so it's seen as a sort of a risky time when you're moving from childhood to teenagehood to adulthood. There's so many risks, right, that can make people deviate, from a sort of standard or safe adulthood life, and so there are many. So you would then think, okay, what are the processes or institutions that are involved in this transition? And so school becomes important to look at. Family becomes important to look at. Relationships become important to look at, right? For marriage as well as having a child. So this is why this framework is useful, because it tells us where to look when we want to investigate what are the sources of risk and protection during this period. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In fact, when I was reading it, I was thinking, God, you made it so hard to be a teenager. I mean, it's like the whole world is thrown at you and you have no skills. And, in this day of social media, you're also very confident that you know it all. So that's I always say, if there's one age I would never like to go back to, it's teenage.
It's true.
It's so risky. It's so risky. Yeah. You know so little, but you're so confident that you know a lot. Wow.
Yeah.
Talk
and
about,
then your brain is not fully developed. This is the other problem. Yes.
Yeah. What about the women who are working? Because you also found a significant HIV prevalence there.
Yeah, so it was strange because oftentimes we think that more educated people, wealthier people, employed people, right, presumably have income, have better health in general. And this is true for many diseases. Generally speaking, the more socioeconomic status as measured by occupation, education, wealth, income you have, the healthier you are. But for some reason, HIV turns all of this upside down on the African continent. So in fact, surveys show the people who have the highest rates of HIV are wealthier, more educated people. And so this was such a big surprise. And even when you look at young women, it was the middle-class women who had the highest rates of HIV, right? We often think this is a disease of poverty. This was the big story, but when you look at the survey data, it's not a disease of poverty. Now, I'll complicate that a bit. So people really wanted to dig into it, and it turns out there's a big rural-urban divide. And so since most Africans are rural, that is really a rural story. So in urban areas, you tend to find the relationship you expect, where poorer people have worse health, more HIV. But in rural areas, richer people have more HIV. So that's how I would nuance it, right? So so there is a rural-urban divide. Some research by Monica Magadi, among others, have found that. So, but broadly speaking, wealthier people have higher rates of HIV. And so I was trying to pick apart this puzzle. So I looked at why are educated girls at risk, why are and wealthier girls, and then why are employed girls at more risk than girls who are not employed, right? So I was trying to understand these. So that was like the third paradox I was trying to unpack in the book. So one of the reasons for this is employment takes you away from home. And so when I was interviewing, I found that the girls who are not employed for work, I used to say not working, but they're working. Even they themselves would say, "Oh, I'm just at home, I'm idle." And then you interview, okay, how does your day look? And they're up first thing in the morning, they're cleaning, they're cooking, they're collecting water, washing clothes, ironing for the family. They're not obviously not idle, right? But this is the language used to devalue women's work. But anyway, they're home, they're busy. They're not meeting people. But the girls who are off to work are meeting people. So that's one, I think, is just opportunities to meet partners away from home.
Yes.
I think the other piece too is the girls at home had learned to recalibrate their needs. Maybe we'll talk more about needs later, right? But once girls left school, right, when they were in school, parents were giving them, money, pocket money to buy things that they liked, things that they felt they needed. But once they left, if they didn't go to university or they didn't go transition to a job and they were just at home, all of that stopped. And so they had to recalibrate their needs and become satisfied with just what was available at home. But girls who are working had just enough money to continue to want to consume modern products, but often their money was not enough to cover the things they needed. And so partners became an important part of provision for the women who worked outside the home. Yeah.
In fact, when I was reading, I thought, you mean we use our bodies to negotiate distribution of wealth? That's how I saw it. That's what's happening. But could you talk about consumptions and desires? Because now we are getting to explaining this phenomenon. What do you mean by those terms?
Yeah. I want to first sort of talk about the body comment and then talk about consumption and desires, right? So I think, and maybe this is something we can come back to at greater length. But I think what struck me when I really thought about transactional relationships is what they're called, or relationships in which it's not just love, but also money is involved. I realized that actually this is part of a long, this is actually normal. Like marriage is the ultimate transactional relationship.
Yes.
And so women's bodies have always been part of an intimate exchange. Women give birth, women provide domestic labor, and men provide money. Right. And so there's always been an exchange, right? But it's sort of often seen as part of what happens within marriage, right? There's a sort of legitimation around this exchange that we're then unsettled with when it happens outside of marriage. But we can come back to that. And so needs and desires. So in a lot of interviews, I was trying to understand why do girls want money, right? Because they would often talk about their relationships and their expectation that the boyfriends would provide. And so I was like, okay, what do you need the money for? Like, oh, there are things we need. So I wanted to understand, well, what do you need? What are the needs? And I was expecting to hear, oh, you need food, shelter, place, what you normally think of when you think this is a need. No, they need sanitary pads, they need lotion, they need deodorant, right? And so as a modern woman, you're like, yeah, those are needs, right? So we're not even talking luxury, so to speak, items, right? But girls were like, in the village, they use rags or cloth. Me, I'm in school, I need sanitary pads. Sanitary pads get finished. You need to buy more. So that means you need money all the time. But if your parents don't think sanitary pads are a need, they won't give you money for sanitary pads. So now you're stuck, right? And so where are you going to get the money? You're in school, you're not working, right? And so the boyfriend then becomes a provider, right? Someone who is taking care of you with things that you need. So similarly, deodorant, right? Again, as a modern woman, you're like, yeah,
I need to
that's a need,
smell
right? So
okay.
these were tricky. It wasn't like, oh, I really want a nice dress. Now, some of them said that, nice trouser, but most of them, when you asked what their needs were, they were things that women who
Or
live in the
borderline.
city, modern, going to school, recognize, yeah, that's a need. But so I started to investigate, where do these needs come from? And it turns out there were marketing companies, Unilever and so on, operating during the colonial era across the African continent, trying to make African women buy products, right? And so in order to make African women buy particular products, they had to create needs, right? So needs are created.
Yeah.
For example, now to be clean, you have to buy soap. Now, Africans have always had means to be clean and to clean ourselves. We've had more our own traditional products we make from nature.
Yes.
You make things from trees, from grass, from sand. We had our own butter, for oiling skin, animal fats. Like, so it's not, we had our own ways of making things. We have things to scrub our skin, like the plant that grows in Uganda, it's called a changwe, to scrub the skin, right? And so we've always had our own products. But a company comes along and says, to be clean, you need to use soap, Omo. You have to use imperial leather. You have to use palm olive. And for your skin to look nice, you have to use Vaseline Intensive, right? And so they market it and associate it with cleanliness and hygiene.
Oh.
And so over time, this now becomes a necessity, right? So even now, can you imagine not bathing, with no soap? Like you're not clean. But our mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers had many ways to get clean without
Yes.
buying products. But once you start seeing soap is a need, then you need money to buy soap. And if your parents are not providing you soap and you don't have a job, where are you going to get soap? And in your head, you're like, this is a need.
Yes.
So there was one girl who, for example, her guardians didn't think sanitary pads were a need. She thought they were a need. And so luckily they gave her transport money. And so she would walk to school to save the transport money so she could use it to buy sanitary pads. Right. And so this is where I realized it's not so straightforward as saying, especially for girls who are going to school, their friends are using deodorant, them they're not, maybe they're smelling. Deodorant is a need.
Yes.
it's not a need, like she won't die without it.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so
Yeah.
this, I realized that these needs, what they're calling needs, are particular to girls, modern girls going to school, and they're made worse by peer pressure, right? Because again, the girl at home who is not going to school, she's just with her family at home. Nobody's using deodorant. Big deal. But if you're in school, peer pressure. You're not
Mm.
using deodorant. Hey, you're smelling. Huh? You have
Mm.
to have deodorant. Look at her. She doesn't have, right? And so now it's really a need.
Mm.
You see what I mean? And so this is the problem. And so the
Mm.
needs are cultivated by marketing companies. And
Mm-hmm.
over time they become needs. And so now girls say that this is something I must have, especially girls going to school. And if parents are not providing those things and boyfriends are, right? And so this will now be even more a reason to pursue boyfriends even while they're going to school for
And
money.
now wigs, eyelashes,
Uh-huh.
and
Yes.
braiding.
Uh-huh.
So, like in my case, what I hear is that the young women are sent money to go to the salon. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Yes.
need. The hair has to
Yes.
look good. You
Yes.
you say that in the book. In the book, you say that consuming women are produced. So, did you
Yes.
get a sense? Is there I don't know whether you noticed anything. Is there more marketing directed at women than at men?
I think so, at least marketing for products that get finished every month.
Oh, yes, you made
I
that
think
point.
boys are
Yes.
marketed to too, but their stuff is
Yes.
like, I asked boys, they're like, I want a bicycle, I want a radio, I want, so these are like long-term durable things that don't get finished every month. But girls' things are things that get finished every month. So you're always having to consume. You're always having to, so I think the other piece to add that's important with the hair, we were laughing, is because um boy, there's an assumption that men are supposed to provide. And
Yes.
that if he loves me, he will want to take care of me and provide for me and show me that he loves me, right? So love is not just words.
Mm.
Love has to be accompanied by actions. And so there was one survey done in Kisumu, where a researcher was like, okay, girl, apparently girls are getting money from boyfriends. Let's ask men. And so she did a survey, and a researcher called Nancy Luke, she did a survey of men. And men were giving, I think, on average, I want to say about maybe 70% of men, I'd have to go back and check the study, were giving about 10% of their monthly income to girlfriends. So it was like normal. So you realize this is normal. Men do give and they're expected to give, and this is just the normal way of how relationships go. These were like to non-marital partners, so girlfriends and so on. And so that suggested that this was just a baseline. Everybody does this. It's not like a few girls and a
Mm.
few men, but it
Mm.
was a normal expectation that men are supposed to provide. And it makes sense. When I thought about it more, it made
It
sense
does.
because
Yes.
when you marry, you want a husband who provides. And so how are
Mm.
you assessing whether this is going to be a good partner? Is how he's providing. And so, in fact, you expect provision to increase as the relationship becomes more serious,
Mm.
because by the time you're marrying, isn't he supposed to bring bride price,
Mm-hmm.
which is the even more probably like a cow, depending on the culture, goats or whatever, money. And so it's a normal cultural expectation that's even inscribed in the marital process and the path to marriage. There's a researcher, Adam Ashforth, who said that the road to marriage is paved with money. And
Mm.
so expecting a boyfriend to provide is normal because you expect a husband to provide, right? And so the two became entangled. Like, I know he's serious, because he's
Because
taking care of me the way he will take care of a wife.
mm,
So hair is one of the many things
yes.
husband is supposed to, because he cares about his wife's appearance, so he's supposed to help with stuff like that, right? It's right. And so it's even if the girl had money, it was still like, this is a man has to show he cares through provision. So this was the trap, and it's still this sort of this expectation that men will
Mm.
provide, I think is a big issue.
But I don't know, there's something counterintuitive about it because when girls go to school, supposedly they are going so that they can be independent. So where's is that a contradiction or what's happening there?
Yeah. I think part of the problem, and maybe many will not see it as a problem, but part of the
Mm.
problem is this, I guess the expression is mine, what is yours is
It is
ours.
ours.
So,
Uh-huh.
so when men are looking at men's income as our income, he's supposed to provide for the household and not depend on my money. My money is mine and to help my family, to help my mother, to help my
Mm.
siblings, so that's what my money is for. Your money is to provide for the family. You see, as opposed to this kind
Mm.
of everyone brings their money together and we both decide how things are going to
Mm.
go. There's this sort of my money is mine, your money is ours. So I think this was the
Uh,
underlying sort of assumption that men are supposed to provide.
And I've had women who can
Mhm,
provide for themselves, sometimes even they're earning more than the men. But
mhm,
I've had these sort of idea that the man will not respect me if he doesn't provide. So it
mhm,
doesn't matter how much money I earn, he has
mhm,
to provide so that he doesn't
mhm,
forget he has children, he doesn't forget he
mhm,
has. So it's more than just the actual material provision, but and I
mhm.
think you make this point. It's proof of manhood, of
Yes,
masculinity.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes. This is again this
yeah,
trap, right? To be a man is to provide.
mm,
To be a man is to take care of a family. To be a
yeah,
man is to be able to marry, which means that you have money to marry. To be a man means, and so these are, I call them traps, right? Because I think it really kind of locks men in, so that if a man can't provide, he feels like he's a failure. Or if
mm,
a man, is being taken care of, the wife makes more, then he feels somehow less. So I think when you link provision to masculinity, you create a bind for men, so that
mm,
men who are unemployed, men who can't find work, men who don't make a lot of money, it's not just, oh, I don't have money, but it becomes about me, who I am as a person.
mm,
Whereas women don't have the same thing. I guess in many African societies, for women, it's about having children. Maybe
mm,
that's the equivalence, where to be a woman is to be a mother.
yeah,
But for men, it's like to be a man is to provide. So I think when it starts to affect identity, then it's not just something that I can or can't do, but it reflects on who I am. And this is linked
mm,
again to this transition to adulthood. Like, what does it mean to be a man? To marry, to
mm,
have children, to have a family, but all of that needs money.
mm.
You see,
And
especially when you move from traditional, my father gives me land, and you have equal numbers of sons and daughters. And so the daughters bring cows home when they marry, and those cows then are used when the brother marries, right? And so you have your house, because you built your house on the land your father gave you. You can do subsistence farming. So you didn't need money the way
mm,
you need money now, right? So you
mhm,
could become a man traditionally in a much more straightforward fashion, but now there's no land, not enough land.
mm,
And the land, if you have it, is not big enough for subsistence farming. Now you have to take kids to school, and so that means you need school fees. Now you need to buy stuff, as opposed to making stuff from the land, right? And so once you sort of make this shift to a money society as opposed to a barter society, there are new expectations around provision. Where before provision is, a wife needs a home, but you can build that with your friends on land that your father gave you. You can give her land on which to farm. It's a very different kind of provision from you need to give her cash so that she can buy XYZ, right? So it's a shift in expectation that now means that the premium on men having work that pays and pays well enough to cover all these things is a part of now identity in a way that it wasn't in the past.
And in fact, your chapter on Luo culture was quite informative. I actually was a bit uneasy about it because I thought this is going to create stereotypes of this ethnic group is like this and like this. But when you get to that chapter, you start to understand the cultural nuances of these transition from a traditional economy to a cash economy. So before we get to that, just explain the cultural interpretations of the way HIV was affecting people in Luo Nyanza.
Yeah. So what I'll say is every society has every culture has its own ways of living, right? I think I use a quote in that historical chapter, the second chapter, that sort of says, something to the effect of ways of life lead to ways of death. Like how you live is how you die. If you're a migrant, car accidents may be a big way you die, which is why they were called road widows.
Yes.
If you're soldier, et cetera, right? So how you live is how you die. It's the basic idea. So every culture has its way of life and its way of death. And of course, it's, we all stereotype ethnic groups, and some of it is about is where there's smoke, there's fire, and some of it is derogatory. And so I try and get into both the debate, even among the Luo, about the stereotypes about the Luo, and what was real and what was not real, and sort of struggling to embrace or reject stereotypes. So even, people like Oginga, for example, and, other prominent Luo both embraced and rejected stereotypes around, for example, extravagance and, living life to the full and so on. But every culture has stereotypes. But there's a root. What I was trying to understand in that chapter was how are people making sense of life in general?
Yes.
And how is that related to this particular way of death in this particular culture? Because there are many groups around Africa which are very affected by HIV, which are very different cultures, right? So we can't say this particular culture is especially prone, right? Because there are many other cultures. And so with that said, I was curious as to how, there was so much death. As you can imagine, with prevalence rates, going, broadly, 1 in 5 people or more. And then among young women, as I gave you those statistics at the beginning, like it's a lot of death. And so I was very struck by this, especially, as I said, in the 90s, early 2000s, when medication hadn't fully rolled out yet at a price people could afford. And so I was trying to think, like, everywhere people try to make sense of things, like, when COVID came along, some communities were really hard hit and some communities were not, right? And so every community tries to make sense of all this death. And I think the most useful way of explaining it is there's a famous study of the Azande by an anthropologist a long time ago called Evans Pritchard, who, a tree falls and hits somebody and they die. So there's a scientific explanation. The tree was old, it was hollowed out, and it just happened to fall, and someone happened to be there, and that's why they died, right? So there's and everybody accepts this. But then the other question is, why did this particular person happen to be walking at that particular time that the tree happened to fall? And that is now the spiritual
Yes.
explanation. And so
Yeah.
I think that it's not that people don't accept the sort of scientific, rational reasons why things happen, but there's an additional layer of meaning that I think that culture adds. And
Yeah.
so the Luo called, I asked my research assistant well, I should say my grandmother was Luo, grandfather Luya. So I have Luo blood in me, but I had to learn the language for the research project because I didn't grow up speaking Luo. So I had a research assistant who was Luo, so I could, who would help. And so I asked her, where does the Luo word for HIV come from? And the word was Ayaki, was like the informal name. And she said Ayaki is like it comes from Yako, which is like it's like she said it's like consuming us greedily, something that consumes greedily. Right. And so the idea is that it sort of eats you up very quickly. And in fact, yeah, when people get AIDS, you're right, then it's HIV is a virus that, for those who don't know, HIV is a virus that attacks the immune system so that you can't fight off basic illnesses.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't actually die of AIDS, you die of like the common cold.
Yeah.
Right. So this is why it's, people could say different things on the death certificate and they would be true, right? Because really what it's doing is takes out your immune system so you can't fight off diseases, right? And so it's people can have no symptoms for like 6 years and then suddenly they get really sick. And so it's like when it happens, it feels sudden when it happens. And then they're really sick with illness after illness after illness after illness after illness. Right. And so the word is like it consumes greedily. Right. And so this is where I started realizing that there's something about consumption. And so starting to see how these pieces sort of came together. But that was the word they used was ayaki matieka. It's finishing us. It's finishing us quickly. Yeah.
And there was an elder who talked about, I found that so fascinating, about the problem with money being hidden wealth. If you could just elaborate on his take on what
Yeah.
was making consumption so deadly for young people.
Yeah, so part of what he was getting at was that the ethic had changed,
Yes.
right? And I don't think this is unique to the Luo,
Yeah.
right? And so in his one of his book, Oginga's book, he had recalled about how when he was young, and one of the elders would go and check the granaries, right, where they were storing food in the night to see the granaries that had a lot and those who had a little, and he would redistribute in the night to make sure the families that had little had more. Right. And so there was this sense of everyone, we want everybody to do well.
Yeah.
We're supposed to share, we're supposed to take care of people. Right. And that was easy to do when you can see
You can see the
visibly.
granary.
You can see the granary, you can see the cows, the goats, like, wealth
Yes.
was very visible. You know who is wealthy and who is not.
Mm.
Right? But then once you start having cash can be hidden in the bank. Like nobody really knows how much somebody else has, right? Other than maybe the banker, right? Because it's now all, behind closed doors, behind passwords, behind, and so there's no way to tell. And so this was part of the problem when girls were more sort of doing maybe relationships outside of marriage, right? Because where before marriage, the man would bring the wealth visibly to the father's home and the relatives, right? He would bring cows, which we can see. he'll bring food which we can see.
Yeah.
Right? But now, she's not marrying, but she's having a relationship and the man is giving her cash. So the money is no longer coming home to the parents. It's coming directly to the girls. I think this was part of the moral panic. It's no longer a patriarchal system where money is moving between men from man to man, right? Because this is how wealth would circulate in the community. There's a scholar called Parker Shipton who wrote a book on entrustment, but talking about how wealth circulates, right? So this is why, for example, some have said there's not often son preference. You want equal numbers of girls and boys because the girls bring the bride wealth, which then the boys use to marry. Right. And so this wealth will sort of move around the community, right? But who is it moving from and to? It's moving from man to man. But now with relationships, it's moving directly to young women in the form of cash that you cannot see.
Okay.
So it's disrupting the circulation of money in the community.
Sorry, but how does that connect to the transactional relationships?
So the transactional relationship is so the definition again, and there's some debate around the definition, right? So it's usually a sexual relationship where there's an exchange of money, but in which it's not commercial sex, right? It's not like sex and here's the cash.
Yeah.
But there's also a relationship or an intimate relationship involved, right? And so now scholars vary on how much they think this is purely about cash or purely about love entangled with money. This is now where the debate lies. But oddly, I don't think people argue about it anymore. It's sort of taken for granted now. In part because relationships involve money. Like we like to think, one of my colleagues here called Viviana Zaliza talked about a hostile worlds approach, right? We like to think love and money are completely separate. So if we hear about a girl getting money in a sexual relationship, we say, oh, she's even the word prostitute.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very kind of morally loaded term. Right? You're selling your body. This is how we talk about it, right? But when you think about it though, money is exchanged all the time, right? So people give gift cards at Christmas, people give gifts, birthdays, people give gifts, men buy engagement rings, which in the US can be thousands of dollars. So there's money involved all the time, gift cards, flowers. Men are buying flowers, it's in that money, right? So why is it any different? When a girl so part of what I argued in the book is it's sometimes a way of exoticizing African women because you never see the term applied in the West. Generally in the past, you used to see it only applied to African women in the context of the HIV epidemic. And so part of the point I was trying to make was that this happens in the West too. So I brought up these examples of, engagement rings and Valentines and, men are supposed to provide. Even in a society where women are making, good money and can be financially independent, there's still this expectation that men are supposed to provide. And so it's not unique. In many societies, money is entangled. And women want men who can provide, and marriage has always been a form of social mobility for women. So providing men being providers has always been like a expectation. There's even historical research that and statistical research that finds that men who are fathers actually make more money, are given more money than men who are not fathers. So it's like a daddy bonus. But then women who have children, married women, have like a wage penalty. So this breadwinner expectation is built in to the modern economy, right? And so you can't make that up. And so this expectation that men are supposed to provide and are supposed to provide, for women, and families in particular. So it's so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
And so the point is that you can't separate intimacy and money so easily. And so why then are we surprised to see these exchanges, especially if men, maybe I can pay for her hair, but I don't have money for bride wealth.
Yeah, it's cheaper.
Who can afford to
Yeah.
marry now? And now that
Yes.
the bar has gone up, you need, I don't know how many cows is the standard these days. Like, how is a young man going to come up with cows? He no longer has dad in the village with a herd of cows. So how is he going to marry?
He
But
can
I
pay
can
two
I can pay
thousand for
for
a
her
wig.
hair. Yeah,
That's
that I can
cheaper.
do. You know,
Could we
so
go
it starts to make
to
sense, right? It's
yeah,
actually,
yeah, it does. Could we go to the school system? That
yeah,
was
yeah.
surprising for me. I felt so bad as a teacher that
Uh-huh.
the school system is actually encouraging consumerism, which makes the girls more vulnerable, especially to the teachers.
Yeah.
So maybe you could elaborate on that and the pressure on the girls, the
Mm-hmm.
students, to
Mm-hmm.
engage in these relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So this was really quite surprising, right? Because you
Yes.
expect that school should be protective. And
Yeah.
there's been a big debate in the literature around this issue, I should say.
Mm.
And I think the current consensus is that over time, you start to see the relationship you expect, where school starts to become protective, like 10 or 15 years into the epidemic, right? In the early years. But the data was very mixed at the time I was doing my study, where some studies found that educated girls have higher rates, some find they have lower rates, some find that there's no relationship between education and so I wanted to get into the statistics because education is just a variable,
Yeah.
number of years or attainment. I was like, but what's actually happening inside the school? What are the dynamics that may be producing these mixed results, right? So why do we assume that school is protective? One, we think, okay, more knowledge,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Mm.
And we expect that if people know, then they're going to act accordingly, right?
Mm.
But there's a saying I encountered in the field, they know, but they ignore.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so knowledge, so in fact, surveys find over 90% knew that, HIV causes AIDS. They know prevention, ABC, abstinence, being faithful, condom use, they know. So I realized the problem here is not knowledge. School has accomplished the goal of knowledge.
Mm.
And I think that was where the mistake was made, is if we just educate people, then they can act in ways that prevent, right? But then you start to think, okay, why are people not doing what they know they should be doing, right? And there's where it becomes complicated. So I then try to walk through abstinence. Why is abstinence hard? Why is faithfulness hard? Why is condom use hard, right? And in part, um, within schools, again, we expect abstinence to be easy because we expect schools to have strict rules around abstinence, right? So I remember in school there was like was it a 4 meter rule? Like you couldn't be within four, boys and girls had to be at least 4 feet apart. There are all sorts
Mm.
of rules. Or parents will send their kids to all girls school, all boys school, right? So there's the expectation that the structure of school is going to be protective, right? Teachers are going to be vigilant, right? So there are all these expectations around how schools should keep these relationships from happening. But the problem is we're thinking, one, the risk is from fellow students,
Yes.
but
Mm.
we're not thinking the risk is from teachers.
As older men with an income.
Right.
Mm.
Teachers are the most obvious. But there's a lot of work done to prevent same age relationships, but not so much, necessarily. I was trying to get into it, and it turned out that in some schools it was known, but there were no sanctions, when
Yes.
teachers approach students. And then you only need like one deviant teacher. The rest could be amazing teachers, but one teacher having relationships with lots of schoolgirls who has HIV can be very dangerous, right? And in some cases, the girls will be like, he helps to pay for school fees. And so, right? Or um, maybe I'll marry him one day and he's a
Mm.
provider, he gets a salary. And the parents may not
Mm.
necessarily object because they're like, he would make a good husband. He has a stable government provided income. You see, and so it became kind of morally, really morally problematic. And so when I was in the district offices, they were telling me, oh, so many teachers are dying of AIDS. And then when I was in school, girls were saying, oh, some students have relationships with teachers. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So this is where I started realizing, the problem. Then the other issue is the school holidays, right? And
Mhm.
so what would happen is, the long holidays, girls go home, and this was a big migrant province, right? Many Luo men would migrate out for work and then come home for the holidays. And so holidays were seen as a dangerous time when girls go home. And so some schools would have like pregnancy tests. Girls came back
They
like the
still
whole school,
do. They still
right?
do.
Because they recognize that the danger happens when you go home. And so, so one girl was saying, yeah, we were congratulated that this year no one was
I saw
pregnant.
that. Yeah.
But you see, again, there's a expect. Oh, okay. We know girls are having relationships when they go home because migrant men come home, they have money,
Hmm.
or you're less structured when you're home because maybe parents are working and you're not supervised, right? So this is the other danger. Again, we think of only when girls are in school, but
Yes.
then they go home, and
Mm.
can get pregnant when they're home. And so that's another potential area of risk. And again, the same men may be offering to pay for school fees, which many did, or and provide the things that, sanitary pads and just show love or show care. Um, and you want the working class boyfriend, right? The girls, that's who you want. And so especially for high school girls who the marriage age was fairly young, like I
Mm.
want to say somewhere between 18 and 20.
Hmm.
And so it's plausible, right? That, well, I'm going to finish high school in 2 years or 1 year and then get married. And so this is somebody who I could potentially marry, right? So it wasn't
Mm.
even like a creepy, right? The way
Yeah.
we might think, oh, there was some interviews where girls are like, yeah, some of them have wrinkles, right? But mostly what they were
Yeah.
mostly they were talking about like, guys in their 20s, the ones who are just out of school and working, which is a
Yeah.
normal age difference, 5 to 10 years for many
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
So this is where it sort of was not so straightforward, like a 14-year-old girl and a, 25-year-old man, right? It was
Mm.
more complicated in terms of the age differences.
And
Yeah.
and talk about the girls who resisted these
Yeah.
relationships. Ah,
Yeah.
we are expecting super women of teenage girls, I think. That's how I felt. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so it's
Mm.
interesting. What I'll say is, whenever I talk about the research here in the Western context, people are so surprised because this idea that relationships are incompatible with education doesn't make sense to anybody in
Yes.
the West, right? But I remember even growing up, stay away from boys. They will
Mm.
destroy your life.
Yes. Oh
No
God, that was
boyfriends.
hammered in my head.
Yeah, because if you
Mm.
get pregnant, that's the end of school, right? So it's a
Mm.
realistic kind of message
Mm.
because they are not going to be giving you condoms, right? And so the expectation is therefore you must be abstinent because if you're not abstinent, the consequence is pregnancy.
Yeah.
There was no, okay, here's condoms or here's birth control. Because here, girls go on birth control in high school, right? And they pass around condoms. And so there's like a middle way. I
Mm.
don't know if it's abstinence or pregnancy. Those are
Yeah.
you stay away from boys and be abstinent, or these are the choices. So I think the important thing to remember with HIV is that even in contexts where it's very high, most people don't have HIV. And most girls don't have HIV, right? So even if 15, 20%, 30% is high, it means 70% don't have it, right? So that means most girls in school either didn't get it, because as I explained, it's very hard to get who are sexually active, didn't get HIV, or I didn't have HIV, and even most girls didn't have HIV, right? So we're really talking about the small group of girls who did, right? And then if again, I talk in the book about that if girls had same age partners, had very low, almost no risk. They tended to be shorter term relationships because boys could not afford to sustain a long-term relationship because they were broke. And then girls had more leverage to demand condoms.
Oh, yes,
Right?
yes,
Because it's the
yeah.
same age.
Yeah.
There's no money, there's no leverage, right? And so this is another reason why they were at low risks. And so you wouldn't see them in the HIV statistics, right? They're sexually active, but not getting HIV because they're having low risk relationships, short-term relationships, or what they call relationships for education, where they're just abstinent but talking to each other and enjoying each other. So I think it's most realistic to say most girls were in that box, right? And so we're just talking about the ones who were sexually active and got unlucky in terms of getting HIV as opposed to the majority. And so in an initial drafts of the book, I was focusing on trying to explain those who get HIV, right? So you explain the water everybody's swimming in and why a few of them, to try and make, rather than saying these are deviant girls, to understand, no, actually, this is a normal product of this particular system. The structure of education, the culture of consumption, as opposed to that, like these are the two bad girls, right? So that's what I was trying to show, is that this is actually a very normal process. But then I was challenged to say, okay, you do a good job of explaining those who do, but what about those who
Those who
don't?
don't. Yeah.
And so this is why I tried in the education chapter to profile the girls who resisted. But I showed how at least the ones I interviewed were very, had to be very unconventional in the setting to resist consumption, to be satisfied with what they had,
They
to
were called
reject boys.
boys.
They said you have to say a strong no, right?
Yeah, that's really
So they really
difficult.
had to be vigilant, to sort of to resist the peer pressure, to have
And they were
relationships.
encouraged by their female teachers in some cases to resist.
And parents, yeah.
Oh, and parents, yeah.
Parents who are like, if you need, tell us, or just didn't feel like, because there was one, I talked about one family where not it was a community health worker actually who was saying that the problem is the mother might say, oh, kawono chemo maber, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, like, if the partner gives you like margarine and bread, and the mother is like, oh, this is great, we're going to eat well.
Oh, yeah.
Kawono chemo maber, we're going to eat well. And so it's like a kind of bring it home and we can share. So parents may not necessarily see these relationships as a negative, because if at the end of the day, most girls don't go on to university, or were not at the time going on to university, many of them finish high school or drop out of high school because there are no school fees, and then they come home, and then they want to get married. And so if you're meeting a partner and he's providing, why chase him away when, a year or two later, you're going to be looking for a husband, and here he was. Do you see? And so it wasn't, when you look at it from that perspective, you understand why, you may not always have all these layers of protection, right? So in other words, school teachers support, peer support, family support, because when girls who had all of those layers could very easily avoid I don't need a boyfriend to provide. My parents are providing everything I need. Some of them would say. Or teachers who would be, really helping girls dream about professions and sort of, stay focused on education and, so it was, if you had all of those layers, then it was very easy for girls to avoid relationships or avoid sexual relationships and stay at low risk. But for many girls, this was not the case. Yeah.
So the workplace and the fishing industry were other dense, what you called dense networks. Maybe you could just explain from either of them what that means in terms of HIV transmission.
Yeah. Yeah, so we call them sexual networks, an important part of understanding how HIV spreads, right? Because you sort of wonder, well, how did it come to ravage the whole continent? So let me give a big picture, then talk about the fishing industry in particular. And so research suggests the HIV started in Central Africa, and that it was one of the many viruses that spill over from animal species to human species, right? So COVID was, well, no, not COVID, but there are many diseases that jump, that is sort of spillover viruses, especially when there's sort of changing environment. And so Ebola is one, for example. And so we think that HIV was one of these spillover epidemics. It jumped species, mutated, was a low-level epidemic in Central Africa, and then it sort of amplified. And there are a lot of theories for why it amplified. One theory is vaccination campaign where they didn't sterilize needles. Another is the commercial sex when people started migrating to the city, men in particular, because of colonial rules around women stay in the reserves or reservations and men go to the city. Then you have a commercial sex industry. And so somebody in one of the villages where HIV was low-lying moves to the city, and then it starts to spread. And then from there, the theories it then moved east, right? So Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, around the lake. And then from there, it moved south. And so the theory then for how it moved is along highways, the Trans-African Highway, from Kenya, East Africa, down to South Africa. And so you then imagine the truck drivers became the migrants who have relationships along the road. That then spreads into the surrounding villages and then networks into the town. In Southern Africa, you have the mining networks. So mining men who go down to South Africa to mine from different countries in Southern Africa, then go back home, right? And so in every case, this is the sexual network, right? So where you have one person who has a relationship with somebody who also has a relationship with somebody. So you can see how HIV will spread for people who are migrating and having relationships along the way. So there are different kinds of migrant networks. So the work I did was sort of thinking about how did it spread around the lake. And so I focused on the fishing industry where you had because fishermen are migrants, and the economy is a gendered economy. So women fish and men sell the fish. And so
the other way around, the women sell.
What would typically happen is men go and fish.
Yeah.
You bring the fish back home, give it to the wife, and the wife goes to sell it in the marketplace. This was sort of the typical economy. But the problem came with lake pollution. So I show how the environment was involved. Was both people were dumping waste and fertilizer into the lake, which then fed the hyacinth weed, which started to destroy fish breeding grounds. And so the fish were migrating further out in search of clean, fresh water. And then also there were fewer fish because the breeding grounds were being destroyed. And so fishermen were now spending longer amounts of time on the water looking for fish. And they didn't have fridges. And so this means that they had to land on the nearest beach. Rather than coming back home to give the fish to their wives, they were now landing on new beaches.
Yeah.
And because it was a gendered economy, they had to find women to sell the fish, right? And so new women. And so they would establish new families. So it wasn't just one time, like it was an economy where the same woman would then have primary access to getting the fish, which she would then go and sell. So they call this the Jaboya system, a sort of sex for fish economy. And so in such an economy, a fisherwoman didn't have any leverage to demand condoms. Because if she demanded condoms, then the fisherman would just move to another woman. And so part of what I saw was this is one way in which the epidemic spread was the fishermen were moving around different beaches, having relationships with different women around the beach. And so they have some of the highest HIV rates were around the lake region, in part because of this economy. And when I was trying to show how the environment provided these sorts of constraints when it mapped onto a gendered economy. Because if women were fishing, you would not have this problem. And if there were plentiful fish in the water and the water was clean, you would not have this problem. So the
Yes.
ecosystem was also involved in this.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's like environment, the cash economy. Wow, there are so many moving parts.
Yeah.
So what are the policy promises that
Yeah.
can successfully intervene in reducing the transmission rates?
Yeah. So part of what I was trying to sort of show with that example in the book is that oftentimes with HIV prevention,
Yeah.
as I found, and when I started interviewing NGO workers, they were so frustrated. Why? Because we've educated them, we've told them,
We've given them
we've
condoms.
given them condoms.
Yeah.
Nothing is changing.
Mm,
HIV rates are still high, and so knowledge was not the problem,
mm,
right? And so I was trying to understand like why are people not acting on knowledge? And so once you start to move to understand like what's the system that people are operating in that makes it hard for them to do what they know they should be doing. So girls aren't using condoms. Why? They have older partners. They don't have leverage to demand safe sex. And the partners are providing for them. And they think,
yeah.
oh, I trust him. I love him. So I'm putting my life in his hands, like literally. And the boys will say, if I use a condom, she'll think that, do you think I'm a prostitute?
Mm,
You must be having a relationship with somebody else if you're using a condom, right? There's a meaning attached to. So this is why they're not using condoms, because the system of meaning
yes.
around condoms is getting in the way, and women lack power to
Mm,
demand safe sex, right? And so with the fisher women lack power to demand safe sex. Why? Because of the fishing system. So the gender system. So if you want to fix it, you teach women how to fish.
mhm,
Then tell them about condom use. So you have
mm,
to pair the individual level intervention with the structural intervention.
mm,
Then now maybe people use condoms. Why? Because you've changed the structure. So there was a study for another intervention done in Western Kenya where instead of telling girls don't have sex, what they did was they showed them the HIV prevalence rates for different age groups of men. Right. And then they came back 18 months later and they found that one, pregnancy rates went down. And then two, if they were pregnant, it was more likely to be with the same age partner.
yeah.
So it showed that girls were responsive to information, but it had to be the right information, right? So if you
Yes.
tell girls don't have sex, that won't work. But if you tell them these partners
You're
are much more
choosing.
likely to give you HIV, they're very responsive. And then if they have same age partners, they have much more leverage to demand condoms, right? And so you change the power dynamics by giving women the information, the girls, that they would then act in ways that would protect themselves, right? So because people are smart, like everybody has a reason for why they're doing what they're doing.
Mm,
So part of the task is you understand what is their reason and what are their constraints, and then act in a way to change the structure. Like if you want people to walk, create paths.
mm,
Otherwise, if
mm,
people are just walking on the main road, they're not going to be walking for exercise every day. But if you
mm,
give them paths, suddenly people start walking, then tell them, okay, you need to walk every day, use the path. You'll see lots of people using the path, right? So you have to create structures that promote individual level behavior that helps with protection. And I think that those just individual level interventions, because you can count the number of condoms, but you can't count like how you've improved the ecosystem to increase the number of fish in the lake. That takes a long time and it's more expensive, but more effective in the long run. If you think of how expensive medication is, like you want prevention because HIV is an expensive disease
Yeah.
to manage. And so I think this is the broad suggestion is you have to think, what are the structural interventions that I can pair with the individual level interventions in order to achieve the outcomes I want. And so this is why I think it's good to study the level above the individual.
Yes.
What's the water they're swimming in?
Mm. And the move to provide sanitary towels to girls in
Yeah.
school so that would intervene at that level. I had never thought of it, yeah, until I read
Needs.
your
If
book.
you deal with what they consider needs, which
Yes.
even you can say, I can see why this is a need, right? So some schools didn't have running water,
Yeah.
didn't have like clean, so how, think now in a period if you're supposed to use rugs, how is it, so it's just your, yeah, okay, let's provide sanitary pads. Because this was
Mm.
a big thing, it came up a lot. So I suggested that in the book as well.
Mm.
Like, okay, this is a need. We can see it's a need and understand why it's a need. Let's deal with that.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. Let's give them information about which partners are at high risk. Not just say abstinence, 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 right? Because people may not want to go to the providing condoms in high schools. Like parents would be up in arms. Yes.
Yeah. Oh
If they think
yeah.
if we give
Yes.
them condoms, they'll have sex. Not
Yeah.
necessarily. Not
Yeah.
necessarily, right? But at least empower girls in other ways.
Mm.
Give them things that are driving them to boyfriends, give them information to protect themselves. Yeah.
Mm.
So at least
Mm.
they have, and then have very, very strict protections against teachers having relationships
Ah,
with
yeah.
students.
Mm. Oh, that's terrible. Even the universities, even the HIV rates in universities was lecturers and students.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I read. I was quite
Hmm.
shocked. I also thought initially that it was student to student, but that's not what I mean. The universities were saying they are losing lecturers. Yeah.
Same story, because the
Mm.
students are broke. They
Yeah.
can't they
Yeah.
can't
Fellow
provide.
students are broke.
They can't
Yeah.
provide, and then there's more leverage, right? It's
Yeah.
much easier to demand condom use from a same age person than from an older guy
Especially if
who's
he's your
provide.
lecturer teaching you
Yeah,
class. You
yeah.
you you don't want to fail the class. So yeah. All right. Is there any new question that has come up that you're curious about since you did this study that you would encourage Kenyan researchers to think about?
Yeah, I think I'm surprised. I'm surprised that these relationships are still there, even though
Yeah.
more girls are working and can
Mm,
afford things for themselves. Like that,
mm,
this, I think too, why this expectation that men are supposed to provide even when girls are working. And how are men managing? I think that this is especially now with high unemployment rates.
yeah.
There's something fundamentally uh wrong.
Yeah.
I think in a culture where everybody's getting good work, I think the provider expectation is okay. Uh men can provide, but if you're in a situation where everybody's struggling to find work, um, then you can't move forward with, marriage, family formation, and you have a generation of young men who feel that they can't move forward because there's a sense in which girls can, and women can kind of get on with it, right?
Mm,
There's a, we don't need men culture. because I'm like, if he's not providing, he's useless, right? Some people use this language because men have been reduced to the ability to provide when they're much more than that. So I
In
think
fact,
there's a freedom for men that I'm hoping can be explored. Like, what are new ways of thinking about masculinity?
yeah.
And what good manhood is, so that men are released from this sort of constraint.
In fact, I've had that conversation with my students. I do an exit class. So the students asked me to talk about relationships and marriage because they have to think about it after they graduate. And I also raised the same question. Why are you making these demands of your fellow classmates? And you're in the same position. You're all struggling to find work. So why are you making this demand of the men? And I mean, there have been girls who are female students who have told me, yeah, I need a man so that he can pay for this and that and that. And they ask, why aren't these our classmates okay with that? I said, come on, you're not serious. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
accepting my invitation and having this conversation. I'm sorry that I'm having this 10 years later, but it's still very interesting research, and I hope at least I hope my students watch this and think of other ways to do research that are meaningful. Yeah, to
No, I
life.
think it's an important topic. I think it's a surprising that it's an enduring topic, that even though the
Yes.
research was done a while ago, it's still relevant.
Yeah, it
But I
is.
think there are new ways. I think if we, new ways of doing gender, new ways
Yes.
of being as men and women,
Mm.
and maybe compromises around expectations or provision that
Yeah.
I hope can emerge in the future. Yeah, but this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.